So you're gearing up for the IELTS. You know that feeling, right? You walk out of the test and your mind just races. What did the examiner actually think of me? Well, today we're going to completely crack that code. Because here's the secret. What they think doesn't matter nearly as much as how they calculate. I mean, really, what if your score has almost nothing to do with how confident you seem, or if the examiner is having a good day, or even how many big, fancy words you manage to use? What if it's all just a system? Something totally different. And this right here is the single most important truth you need to get your head around. Examiners don't feel your score. They calculate it. It's not some subjective opinion. It's a cold, hard, mathematical process. And you know what? Once you understand the rules of the game, you can finally start playing to win. Okay, so let's get right into it and start tearing down some of the biggest myths out there. The first one, that scoring is all about the vibe you give off. It's actually way, way more predictable than that. So many people, maybe you too, get completely hung up on the stuff on the left. Am I confident enough? Is my accent okay? Is the examiner in a good mood? But look, the reality is all of that is just noise. Your score comes directly from the stuff on the right. Fixed scoring criteria, global standards, and a detailed rubric. It's a consistent calculation every single time for every single person. Now, to really understand this, you gotta change how you see the examiner. Seriously. Stop thinking of them as some kind of judge who's there to pass a sentence on your English skills. Instead, I want you to start thinking of them as an auditor. I mean, just think about who these people are. They're certified professionals. They are trained under incredibly strict global standards, and they get retested and monitored all the time. Their job isn't to have an opinion about you. Their job is to follow a marking rubric word for word and measure what you do against it. They're just auditing your performance. And this is absolutely the key. An examiner doesn't listen to your amazing story about a family holiday and think, wow, I really liked that. Nope. They listen and think, okay, the complex sentence structure there, that matches a band 7 descriptor. The vocabulary choice, that's more of a band 6. See, it's a matching exercise. That's it. So, if it's all just a calculation, what's the formula? Well, it all boils down to 4 key areas. Just 4. Let's break down exactly where every single one of your points comes from. Now, take a good look at this. What's so important here is that perfect balance. Each of these 4 keys is worth exactly 25% of your final score. And that means there's nowhere to hide. If your grammar is brilliant but your fluency is a bit shaky, your whole score gets pulled down. You've got to perform well across the board. Okay, first up, fluency and coherence. This is pretty much all about flow. Can you connect your ideas in a way that makes sense? Can you speak without these long, awkward pauses or, completely losing your train of thought? The main question the examiner has in their head is super simple. Is this easy for me to follow? And listen, this is a hard truth a lot of people get wrong. Speaking faster does not equal higher fluency. In fact, most of the time, it just leads to more mistakes. Real fluency is all about speaking at a natural, comfortable pace with control. It's about being in control, not just rushing to get the words out. The second key is something called lexical resource. It's just a fancy name for vocabulary, but pay close attention to the question it's trying to answer. It's not how many big words do you know? It's how well do you use words to say what you actually mean. Precision, my friends, is everything. This right here, This is where so many points are just thrown away. Examiners want to hear words that are appropriate and natural. They are not impressed when you use some super rare word but get it wrong, or when you try to force an idiom in where it doesn't belong. It's really not about showing off, it's about being clear. So the main takeaway for vocabulary is this. It is always, always better to use a simple word that you know is 100% correct than to take a risk on a complex word and mess it up. Accuracy beats omission every single time in this part of the test. All right, our third key is grammar, and the official name tells you everything you need to know: grammatical range and accuracy. It's basically a two-part challenge. One, do you use a variety of sentences? And two, can you do it without making a ton of mistakes? And I've got some good news for you here. You don't have to be perfect. Even people who score a band 7 will make some mistakes. What the examiner is really listening for is control. A few small errors are fine, but what's not fine is constant basic errors. That's what we call grammar chaos. The difference is a high scorer's mistakes don't stop you from understanding what they mean. And finally, we get to the fourth key. This one's a little different because it changes depending on the test. For the speaking test, it's pronunciation. But for the writing test, it's something called task achievement. Let's take a quick look at both. Pronunciation is probably the most misunderstood part of the entire test. So let's be crystal clear. It is not about your accent. You get 0 extra points for sounding British or American. It is about clarity. Can people understand you easily? It's about making clear sounds, putting the stress on the right part of the word, and having a natural rhythm to your sentences. Now, for the writing test, that final 25% is all about task achievement. And honestly, this is the absolute make or break part of the writing section. You could write an essay with perfect grammar and incredible vocabulary, but if you didn't fully answer the question that was asked, your score is going to collapse. It's that critical. So now that we know the 4 keys, let's talk about where things can go wrong. Where do people actually lose points? It's time to talk about the silent score killers. These are the common mistakes that can drop your score by a whole band level, sometimes without you even knowing it. Okay, these are the biggest traps you have to avoid. Writing a beautiful essay that's slightly off topic, that's a fail on task achievement. In the speaking test, reciting a perfectly memorized answer, examiners are trained to spot that. And it shows you can't be flexible. Overusing those robotic templates, or only answering half of a two-part question. These are the kinds of unforced errors that really hold people back from getting the score they deserve. So, how do you avoid all these traps and really aim for those higher scores? Well, it all comes down to a shift in your mindset. You have to stop thinking of yourself as a performer who's trying to impress a judge. Instead, you need to start thinking like a clear communicator who's just talking to an auditor. So, what's the actual difference between a pretty good score like a band 6 and a great score like a band 7? Just look at the change here. At band 6, your meaning is clear, but it's kind of limited. At band 7, it's clear and flexible. At band 6, your mistakes are noticeable. At band 7, they don't really get in the way. But it all comes down to that bottom row, making the leap from inconsistent control to visible control. That is the real game changer. So, what does this actually look like when you're in the test? Well, high scorers all follow a pretty similar strategy. They focus on answering the question directly before they even think about trying to impress anyone. They use vocabulary they have completely mastered.
They prioritize clean, accurate grammar over trying some super complex structure they might get wrong. Basically, they give the examiner exactly what the checklist is asking for.
And that really brings us to the biggest mindset shift of all. The IELTS isn't truly a language test. It's a performance test. It's not about how much English you have stored in your brain. It's about how well you can perform with your English on the day according to a very specific and predictable checklist. And once you truly understand that checklist, well, that's when you hold all the power.